Shotgun to shotgun.
Okay, peace, family. First and foremost, I just want to thank my brother Alias and brother Bomani for giving me the opportunity to present this morning during the 100 Years in the Whirlwind Conference. So the topic that I've been given to present on today is organizing, the key component of Pan-Africanism. And before we even get into the presentation, what I'd just like to make clear very quickly is that when it comes to Pan-Africanism, oftentimes there is a great deal of confusion as to what Pan-Africanism means and who is a Pan-Africanist. So what I'd like to do just really quick is just delineate between the different projects historically that have been carried out under the banner of Pan-Africanism. So I've broken these projects down into 5. And the first one is a colonial project that is also referred to as a race first project. And from a colonial perspective, this is a project that has been carried out by white people, white colonialists, from the idea that basically African land, African people, African resources should belong to and be controlled by white people. And they've referred to that project as Pan-Africanism. It's been carried out under a capitalist project, and I define that as like a pro-Black or pro-African project. That one is not necessarily political in nature. It is one where Black people use their Blackness or Africanness as a convenience to push forward their personal or individual economic agenda. But when you scratch beneath the surface, it really is just pan-capitalism, so to speak, and not Pan-Africanism. It's been carried out under a neo-colonial project. This project is one that is anti-direct white rule. So these are your Black misleaders or neo-colonial class of leadership that exists on the African continent that serve the interests of foreign invaders. And they do so because financially, they make out really well by, standing in the gap as managers who manage the colony on behalf of our enemies. And then, a socialist project. So the socialist project is, that's like your Nkrumahs. We really saw that, especially after the 5th Pan-African Congress that happened in 1945. Where socialism became the dominant thrust of Pan-Africanism. And then last but certainly not least is a nationalist but also a race-first project. And this project is what I refer to as the Garvey Project, the project where we are essentially trying to create a super state on the African continent, a super state that would represent the interests of all African, meaning Black people all around the globe, a super state by which all Black people would be made citizens essentially overnight. So that project is a Garveyite project and one that has not been taken up by many people. So lots of people who refer to themselves as Pan-Africanists typically fit within the first 4 buckets, so socialist, neo-colonial, capitalist, or colonial, but not many are actually Pan-African nationalists. It's a very small few under the umbrella. But I think that, with this weekend, the 100 Years in the Whirlwind Conference, with all the activities that are happening during this historic Black August, we are seeing a significant revival in Garveyism and race-first consciousness and nationalist programming and organizing. So I do just give thanks again for the opportunity to just present on this topic today. In terms of the 5 historical Pan-African projects, because it's not necessarily fair that I mention them here and not give detail, but I did do an entire presentation, and you can find that presentation on Brother Shakara's YouTube channel. The name of the presentation is called The Pan-African Costume Ball. and the climate of confusion. So you can go and check that out. And I literally go into great detail, differentiating between the 5 projects, why there's so much confusion, and basically making the argument that of the 5 projects, Garveyism, or the Garveyite project, is the only one that is truly liberating for African people. So I'm making an argument that we essentially need to be highly critical of those remaining projects, and we need to do what we can to raise the consciousness of our people, so that they have a better understanding, politically and culturally, of what those other projects represent, and why they don't necessarily have our best interests in hand as African people. So while I won't cover that today because that's not what I've been asked to cover, I just wanted you to know that if you want to learn more about that, you can definitely go and check that out, as well as, I have lots of lectures on my YouTube just helping to shape, and develop the political consciousness of our people. All right, so I've been asked to talk about organizing as the key component of Pan-Africanism. So what I decided to do was just give thought to what Garvey has said about organizing, and all throughout the philosophies and opinions of Marcus Garvey, you will see that the text is replete with examples or with quotes in terms of the importance of organizing, right? That organizing is essentially central, to the success, to our ability to achieve, victory in this fight that we are currently engaged in, right? So one of the first quotes that I was drawn to comes from the Philosophies and Opinions, where Garvey says that the greatest weapon used against a Negro is disorganization. The second quote, he says here, we are but perpetuating our own sorrow and disgrace and failing to appreciate the first great requisite of all peoples, organization. Third quote, he says here, point me to a weak nation and I will show you a people oppressed, abused, taken advantage of by others. Show me a weak race and I will show you a people reduced to serfdom, peonage, and slavery. But show me a well-organized nation and I will show you a people and a nation respected by the world. Okay, so fourth quote, it says here, we of the Negro race are moving from one state of organization to another, and we shall continue until we have thoroughly lifted ourselves into the organization of government, right? So Garvey is arguing that Black people need a nation in order to protect their interests. And in order to effectively manage and run a nation, you need a government, which is a form of organization, right? A military is a form of organization. A business is a form of organization, but Garvey understood that in order to achieve any of our goals, we would need organization, right? And government was the highest ideal to which Garvey aspired. So the UNIA and ACEL, in many ways, was a government in waiting, right? They had a constitution, the Declaration of Rights, right, which we commemorated this month, which were signed on the 13th of August, the 100-year anniversary of the red, black, and green, right, giving us a flag. He's saying that we are a nation, right, and we are working to establish a government. So Garvey was always very clear about the significance of organization. Here's another quote that I thought was really good. He says that organization is a great power in directing the affairs of a race or a nation toward a given goal. To properly develop the desires that are uppermost, we must first concentrate through some system or method, and there is none better than organization. Hence, the UNIA appeals to each and every Negro to throw in his lot with those of us who, through organization, are working for the universal emancipation of our race and the redemption of our common country, Africa. Right? So it's very important to understand, like, the role of organization and this work that we are doing, right? There's no such thing as leadership or service or work that is separate of organizational work, right? So, one of my litmus tests, if somebody says that, they're a Pan-Africanist, I automatically look to see, okay, well, where's their organizational work? What organizations are they a part of? Where are they giving their labor to, right? If you're saying that you're a Pan-African, but you're really, you're just a personality, right? It's all about you. You have no organizational work, no organizational attachment. It lets me know that you're more so into preaching and you're using Pan-Africanism as your gospel, right? You're trying to build a church. You aren't necessarily trying to prepare Black people for liberation or for sovereignty, because in order to do that, it requires the vehicle of organization, right? And if you're politically mature, right, if you are a politically or strategic person, you understand, right, that one cannot be done without the other, right? So I always encourage folks that if there's not an organization out there that you believe speaks to your vision for a free and redeemed Africa, then go and create one. But chances are there is already an organization that exists. But if not, go and create one. Go and find some like-minded people and build one. One of the things that I learned just from growing up, I don't want to say growing up because it'll make it seem like I've been doing this work much longer than I have, and I don't want to make that the case. We have to remember that Garvey arrived in the U.S. in 1916. Right, and by 1920, right, and that 4-year period, he had grew the organization from 200 members to 2 million members. So it doesn't mean that you have to have been doing this work, for the past 20 and 30 years in order to be effective. But what it does mean is that you have to commit yourself to working in an organized formation. Right, Garvey was 27 years old when he created and founded the UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association. So it doesn't mean that you have to be 40, 50, 60, 70 years old. It don't mean you need to have been doing this for the past 30 to 40 years, but it does mean that if you are serious, right, and if you are politically mature, then you understand that it requires organizational work in order to achieve the vision of Pan-Africanism. To achieve the vision of African sovereignty and achieve the vision of a liberated, and a redeemed African people. All right. So last quote that I'll just mention here, Garvey says that I am not advising you to arm now with the things they have. I'm asking you to arm through organization, arm through preparedness. You do not want to have guns and bombs just now. You have no immediate use for them, so they can throw away those things if they want in Washington on Armistice Day. I'm saying to the Negro people of the world, get armed with organization. Get armed by coming together 400 million strong. That is your weapon. Their weapon in the past has been big guns and explosive shells. Your weapon must be universal organization, right? So Garvey was incredibly clear. And that last quote comes when they were right after World War I, where the U.S. and the Allied powers were meeting about the peace accord. I think it was happening in Paris. Garvey wrote an essay about what was happening. So he wasn't telling Black people like, hey, you don't need guns. He was just talking about like from a nation perspective, where you have all these white nations talking about, okay, well, now that the war is over, we need to, agree on a method to get rid of, these bombs and things like that were necessary for the war. Garvey is saying to us that, hey, at this moment, that isn't our priority. Our priority is organization. We have to get organized. Remember, he said that disorganization is the greatest weapon used against the Negro, right? So he was always pushing for us to get organized, because he knew that through organization is the only way that we could collectively act, right? It's impossible for us to act as individuals. We have to learn how to fight and rank. We have to learn how to take orders. We have to know how to be disciplined, right? And in order to do that, it requires organization. And what was brilliant about Garvey is that Garvey recognized that the organization needed to cover many different facets, right? So Garvey was a president general, meaning it was just not political, it was also military. You understand what I'm saying? So the UNIA was organized in a manner that essentially Garvey was trying to create or develop us into a people's army. But before you can do that, the first thing you have to do is to get organized, right? So organize is that as that first, prerequisite, right? And that's why Garvey states that, we are but perpetuating our own sorrow and disgrace and failing to appreciate the first great requisite of all peoples, organization, okay? Okay, so this was an article that I found very interesting. And I was doing some research on engagement in the 21st century, right? We all know that we exist now in like the information age, that media plays a big role in our ability to attract, convert, or really just get information or propaganda out about the work that we are doing in the community, right? And I found this article to be very interesting. It states that why every company is now a media business. And when I read the article, my immediate thought was that our organizations must become media businesses as well. But what you'll see from this presentation is that Garvey was far ahead in terms of that realization that the central role that media and propaganda play, and the work that we do. Garvey was just so far advanced. But I want to read this quote, and then I'm going to go right back to Garvey. It states that today the battle for attention is brutal. Every organization is in the content creation and distribution business. It's no longer enough to either produce great content or own a distribution channel. Companies must do both so they can respond quickly to changes in audience preferences. Even amazing content needs to be delivered through channels that audiences prefer, right? So let me just show really quick how Marcus Garvey and the UNIA were just ahead of their time with just the understanding of how to organize our people, and also the role that propaganda and media play in that organization, right? Because in order to effectively organize a people, you first have to organize their thoughts, right? We always talking about organizing their money. Well, if you organize their consciousness, you can then organize their behavior, and their behavior will dictate how they spend their money, how they engage politically, socially, all these other vehicles that make up society, right? But the consciousness, right, or the culture will really control that. But you have to have a way to center them, right, on their own things, right? Many of us, for example, in our organization, Afrocentricity International, every year we have what's referred to as a reorientation program, right? So it's like, and the thought behind that is that every organization has an orientation, but in acknowledging that our people are already oriented in one perspective and another, but most likely they aren't oriented in a perspective that centers them. That means that when they come into the organization, the first thing we want to do is reorient them. So we want them to become centered in who they are, right? They've been dislocated through their consumption of media, their consumption of education, their consumption of entertainment has dislocated them and has them outside of themselves, right? They are not centered as a people. So as a result, when people come into the organization, we're talking about organizing them. Okay, then the first thing we need to do in order to properly organize them is to center them, right? So I'll get back to that later in the presentation. But this right here, it goes back just again to Garvey's brilliance, right, where he talks about what his first priority was, right? So he stated that, okay, the first requisite of all people, all intelligent people, is that of organization. But pay attention to how Garvey intelligently goes about organizing Black people, right? So this is a quote that comes here from Race First, which was written by Tony Martin. And the quote says, "I have many large schemes on my mind for the advancement of my people that I cannot expose at the present to the public, as in such a case, my hope of immediate success would be defeated, as my enemies are so many and they are ever anxious to misrepresent me. I have firstly to found a press of our own and to get some working start so as to demonstrate my true intentions," right? So Garvey is saying here that the first thing that I have to do in order to achieve my goals is I have to establish a Black independent media that can serve as the organ that will convey the ideas that I have to the people, right? You need some type of media that you control, right? Garvey couldn't spread Garveyism through the New York Times. You know what I mean? Like, he couldn't spread, Garveyism through the Guardian or the papers of his day. He said, no, in order for us to effectively spread our message, we have to finance it, right? And it has to be an independent institution, right? When I first started organizing, I used to always, I've been organizing for a while. But when I started writing my bios and people would say, hey, we want you to come speak, do you have a bio? I would always refer to myself as a grassroots organizer. But then, like, as I started to give it more thought, I would say, no, I'm not a grassroots organizer. I'm a grassroots institution builder, right? Because organizing is really all about, it's truly about manifesting yourself through institution, meaning operationalizing a set of ideas and a set of values within an institution, because the institution is what allows you to live forever. As long as you can protect and defend that institution, it will allow you to live perpetually, right, into the future. But Garvey said the first thing that I have need to do is I firstly have to found a press of our own, so that I can get started working and demonstrate my true intentions. So he did that through the creation of the Negro World. This copy of it that I have here actually is them talking about the first International Convention of the Negroes, which was held 100 years ago. But this was Garvey's genius, right? Garvey recognized that propaganda, right, is essential in this war that we are engaged in. So he was a genius for that one. Right. This again comes from Race First, where Marcus Garvey is talking about the importance of propaganda. So it says here, the white man's propaganda has made him the master of the world, and all those who have come in contact with it and accepted it have become his slaves. The Universal Negro Improvement Association is now calling upon the 400 million members of our race to discard the psychology and propaganda of all other peoples and to advance our own. All right. So this quote right here, it comes from Tony Martin's Race First. The last part states that among Garvey's greatest feats was the thoroughness and success of his propaganda effort. The UNIA propaganda was distributed in a variety of ways. In fact, practically every aspect of the organization had propaganda value. Right. So everything that Garvey did was to further the propaganda and to further the program, right? The program of race first, race pride, self-determination, nationhood, right? Those sacred principles of Garveyism. Everything that he did, right, had an element of political theater or propaganda that was meant to drive home and build up a sense of pride, right, a sense of national consciousness within all the people who came in contact with it, right? So Garvey was very, very purposeful in the way that he drove his propaganda effort. So it just was not in the writing, it was in everything that he did, even within the auxiliary institutions within the UNIA, right? The UNIA was the umbrella, but under that umbrella, you had several auxiliaries, right? So you had the African Legion, you had the Universal Motor Corps, which was a paramilitary women's group. You had the Black Cross Nurses, you had the Juvenile League, you had the ACL, which is the African Communities League, which represented the business interests of the organization, where you had the Negro factories and the Black Star Line. All these things fell under that, right? So Garvey was pursuing a comprehensive plan of nation management or of organization, right? So it just wasn't business. It just wasn't spirituality or religion. It was everything that the nation needs to be properly organized and thought about in a manner so that our agenda is always being advanced in the face of propaganda that is working against us and looking to destroy us, essentially make us a mental people, if you're familiar with Dr. Bobby E. Wright. All right, so the UNIA, through their organization, right, because again, this presentation is about, organization as the key component of Pan-Africanism, right? So the UNIA was so effective in that they were able to capture the hearts and the minds of people, right? Garvey knew his audience. He knew his audience very well. In fact, I forget which writing that I read this in. It may have been Garveyism, written by Amy Jacques Garvey. But he basically said to his wife that, hey, like, I'm writing for a people that is 60 years removed from slavery, right? So the way in which I'm going about engaging them, the way my style of writing to reach them is very strategic. Garvey leveraged the Black church, effectively, because that's really where we were at that time. And he knew that there was no way to our people but through the church, right? So the church actually played a significant role in Garvey's ability to actually achieve success in organizing our people. But I want to read really quick quote here. This comes from The Modern Temper, American Culture and Society in the 1920s. It was written by Lynn Dumenil. And this just it speaks to Garvey's ability to fuse racial pride with a sense of spiritual and secular mission, which made the UNIA just so successful, right? So I'll read this here. It says, the premier Black nationalist organization of the period was Marcus Garvey's UNIA. Garvey did not expressly constitute the UNIA, a social and economic organization that fostered Black pride and self-help, as a religious movement. Nonetheless, it had strong religious overtones. UNIA meetings were patterned after church services, complete with hymns, chaplains, prayers, offerings, and sermons. Religious themes figured in the content as well. Garvey drew primarily on Christianity, but insisted upon a religious conception broad enough to include Blacks outside the Christian fold. Right, this is important because whenever somebody tries to peg Garvey as a Christian, I let them know immediately, like, you didn't read Garvey. If anything, Garvey used Christianity as a tool, but he tells you straight up and down that by no means is the Christianity that he's speaking from the Christianity that people were given as slaves. In fact, I have a quote here that I could read. This comes from Philosophies and Opinions, The Image of God. He says here, we as Negroes have found a new ideal. Whilst our God has no color, yet it is human to see everything through one's own spectacles. And since the white people have seen their God through white spectacles, we only now started out, late though it be, to see our God through our own spectacles. The God of Isaac and the God of Jacob, let him exist for the race that believes in the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. We Negroes believe in the God of Ethiopia, the everlasting God, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost, the one God of all ages. That is the God in whom we believe, but we shall worship him through the spectacles of Ethiopia, right? So what Garvey is essentially putting forth, he's putting forth a nascent, really African-centered or Afrocentric argument, right? Garvey is trying to say that our ideas or our ideals have to be expressed through our own lens, right? So if you know anything about Christianity or Judaism, well, Jacob and Isaac, right? These are like some of like the so-called like the patriarchs, right? Or the prophets of that particular tradition, right? So Garvey flat out rejects them. He says that, let the people, whose race, represents Jacob and Isaac, let that be, the way that they, get to the Most High. He said, but when we go to the Most High, we're going to go through our ancestors, right? Through the lens of Ethiopia, through us as Black people, not through the Jews, right? So very early on, Garvey was putting forth this argument that we need to be centered, right? And our institutions need to be developed and run based upon, African-centered or Afrocentric ideas. I think that that's very important because Garvey was making this argument at the beginning of the 20th century. Okay, so what I'll do right here, I want to actually draw on that further, right? So I'm going to quickly just step out of the PowerPoint presentation and I'm going to go over to lesson 12 of Message to the People, the course on African philosophy, because Garvey states what I just referred to very explicitly in his teaching on what he referred to as the purpose of institutions, right? Because if we're talking about organizing, especially intergenerational, we need institutions because institutions house our memory and they allow us to develop, no different than a child develops, in the womb over like that 9 or 10 month period. And then they're like in their, your adolescence, like your different phases, right, of development, Right. Well, an organization, a people, or an institution go through that same process of development, right? You go to through your adolescence, your toddler phase, to your fully grown and fully developed, right? So let me just really quick just come out of here. Okay, so it says I can't minimize Zoom. All right, didn't mean to do that. My apologies. But okay. Cool. So lesson 12. So what I'm going to do really quick, family, is I'm going to read just the first pages 100 to 103. And then I'm going to, really unpack that for you a little bit here. So the purpose of institutions. It says, organized society is always a mass of people, and as such cannot do anything explicit or by detail by themselves. Hence, the organizing of institutions to do the particular work that cannot be done by the masses as a whole. There are different kinds of institutions in a society, but each institution, has its particular function, whether it be the church, college or university, school, hospital, academy, chamber of commerce, fraternity, trade union, literary club, sports club, athletic club, gymnasium, YMCA or YWCA, etc. In our present civilization, no society would be considered functioning properly if such institutions did not exist. Therefore, it is necessary for the Negro to pay close attention to developing the appreciation for institutional life. It is not necessary or binding that he copies completely the systems, methods, or manners of these institutions, except insofar as they would go to help him to promote a higher life and accomplishing the most out of this organized society. It is incumbent upon him that he also have and control his own institutions based upon his own cultural and civilized idealism. Let me stop there right there really quick, because you see Garvey putting forth this nascent argument for African-centeredness or Afrocentricity, right? Where he's saying that it's incumbent upon us as Black people that our institutions are controlled and developed based upon our own cultural and civilized ideas, right? He's saying that we don't need to mimic anybody else or erect our institutions based upon their culture or based upon their ideology. He says, no, we have to develop and create our own ideology, right? Or our own theory, so to speak. He says, as for instance, he may have his own church, but it is not necessary for him to adopt the peculiar articles of faith of the churches of alien races. He is not a Hebrew, therefore he would not adopt the Hebrew faith. He is not by origin a Roman Catholic, nor an Anglican, because these faiths or religions were founded by white men with an idea of their own. Right. So when people tell you that Garvey was a Roman Catholic, Garvey was very, very clear. Right. So, yeah, I'm okay. I won't stop here because it's very easy for me to take this off on a tangent when it comes to Garvey. But again, he's stressing the need of different cultures, different races to have their own ideas, their own ideology that centers them in the process of their thinking and the process of their development, right? So he goes on to say, in his religious philosophy, the Negro may safely adopt articles of faith to link him to the Godhead of the Christian faith and practice such as his particular religion, and so likewise with all other institutions. His universities, colleges, and schools may engage in the same process of education, but with an adopted curriculum necessary for the special benefit of the Negro. Right. So, I mean, Garvey is so very clear. We talk about African-centered or Afrocentric education. He's saying that the curriculum needs to be adopted to benefit us. It needs to be biased towards us. The curriculum needs to be so that we can carry out our agenda. Like, that's the purpose of education for self-determination. Right. So he says his clubs, academies, and unions should be modeled in the same way, with the absolute objective of attaining the end that is particularly desired by the race. You already know what that end is. Garvey is saying that the end that we want is that of our own nation. right? That of our own government. So Garvey is arguing that essentially all of our institutions, right, should be pointed in that direction. They should be centered in that direction. So that's very important. It says the Negro should never completely surrender himself to the institutional life of other people. Otherwise, he will not be original, but purely and merely a copyist. If this could be appreciated, it shows or reveals the wide fields which have remained untouched for Negro organization and Negro activity. It is through the institutions of a race that the civilization and culture of the race are built. The Negro should occupy himself in cultivating his own culture and ultimately achieving his own civilized ends, so that in the comparison of racial achievements, he may be able to stand out distinctly on those achievements on his own accounts as others may do, right? So Garvey was so clear. And again, he was putting forth these ideas, but he never got a chance to fully develop them. But it's for us, his progeny, to carry on that project, right? And to continue developing these ideas, right? He says the Negro should occupy himself in cultivating his own culture and ultimately achieving his own civilized ends, right? This means, Garvey is essentially calling for re-Africanization 100 years ago. You understand? But people miss out on that. And it's often just because we don't read Garvey, and because we don't read Garvey, we tend to take other people at their word based upon the lies that they tell about Garvey. Because you can't tell the truth about Garvey, because when you tell the truth about Garvey, it makes you look like a coward if you aren't doing the work of Garvey. Okay, so let me keep going. It says, to live on the achievement of others is to really admit the superiority of others and the inferiority of self. As a fact, it is by such comparisons that the Negro is judged as an inferior being. Nothing that is handed to the Negro by somebody else should be sufficiently satisfactory to the Negro. He should seek to surround it with originality and then claim it as his own. He is justified in remodeling and reshaping the things to suit himself, because there is nothing new under the sun, whatever other people have. The Negro is the father of civilization. He constructed the first government in Africa and thereby taught others the way. Always seek to improve on whatever you see fit to adopt. Never leave it at where you adopt it, because somebody else will claim it and prove their right to it. When you have added to it or taken away from it, you can prove that it is not the same thing. Therefore, it is yours. Always carefully and thoroughly investigate the accomplishments of other races. Try to improve and beat them at those achievements, and keep your achievements a secret from them. Never open up the facts of your achievements to others, because they are too anxious to get the last word on anything that is worthwhile. Always hide the secrets of your achievements while demonstrating those achievements. It must be like a chemist selling his preparation or demonstrating it without giving away his formula, because the moment he does so, there will be many similar preparations on the market. Each institution of a people has its special objects to attain, and may not fit in with the idealism of other peoples. So the Negro should have his own. Pay attention to what he just said right here. When he says that each institution of a people should have its own special aims and objectives, and the ideas of that institution should be Black ideas and shouldn't be basically congruent with the ideas of other people. He's saying that your institutions are the things that you put in place to achieve your aims and objectives. Therefore, they need to be centered. Right? You can't have institutions where you're using Marxism and feminism and socialism and all these other ideologies that people have created to further their own objectives that may not necessarily agree with your objectives as a people, right? So Garvey says he is not to be a slave to other people's idealism, or he is not to be a slave to other people's ideas. Right? We're smart enough to come up with our own ideas that suit our own means, right? So lastly, I'm just going to read, I'm going to read just the top of this paragraph, and then I'm going to stop. I'm going to read up until idealism, and then I'll stop. It says, in some detail or other, each people's institutions must differ from yours according to their particular idealism. The Jew could never be a Negro in his institutional line, nor an Anglo-Saxon a Latin, nor a Latin a Teuton, nor neither a Negro. Therefore, a Negro must not try to be either, but in his institutional line, be himself. like the Jew, whom nature made a Jew for a particular purpose, therefore he must be different both in his habits and his way of living and in his idealism. Right? So Garvey, you know, this is very important. And I won't read the entire thing. I'll stop there because, you know, I want folks to continue to read that on their own, but it's just so important to understand the significance of us as African people developing our own ideologies, developing our own theories, and then putting them into practice via the vehicle of organization, via the vehicle of institution, right? Our institutions should house our ideas, our values, and our culture, right? And the most important institution in the Black world is the Black family. Right. So I would stop for questions, but I'm going to keep going, and then I'll just open up for Q&A. Just a few more slides. Some important lessons learned just from paying attention to Garvey and his approach to organizing. The obvious one, right, is that when you're organizing, it has to be African-centered or Afrocentric, right? Or it's not going to work. And that's what Garvey was pushing for through the UNIA, through Liberty Hall, through the colleges and universities that he was trying to create, right? He was far ahead of his time. But three lessons that I documented here are, one, that Black people require more than just information. They require inspiration to be moved into action, right? So I think that that's very important when you look at and observe Garvey's propaganda. Garvey used a significant amount of political theater, a significant amount of strategy. He didn't just overwhelm people with facts and numbers and data. He made history come to life. And he told stories and used propaganda in a way that activated our African spirit and activated that need for us to engage in the project of nation building, right? So that's the first lesson. The second lesson that's very important that we take from Garvey is that to be effective at mobilizing Black people, you need to develop a content production apparatus that is strong enough to counter prevailing anti-Black narratives, right? So when I look around today, like most of us are using, you know, other people's media. We don't have our own independent Black media that's strong enough to counter the media that's coming out of Hollywood or all these other institutions, right? So that should be one of our first priorities, right, is working effectively to establish, you know, a media or content production apparatus that can counter these prevailing anti-Black narratives that that exist. So that, you know, that's significant work that we have to be about. So I do want to take a moment to shout out my brother, Dr. Obadele Kambone, or Okunini Obadele Kambone, for the work that he's doing with the Abibi Tumi platform. We had a very good conversation recently talking about this paradox that we as Black people have, where we spend all of our time building up, you know, the media institutions of alien races, right? We aren't race first when it comes to the digital world, right? We're spending all of our time on Twitter and YouTube and Facebook and these billion-dollar corporations and building up their organizations and institutions. And then when we come over to places like Abibi Tumi, we're like, man, but this place doesn't feel the same as like this billion-dollar company, right? So you get this paradox of is Black people don't support it and we don't use it. And because we don't support it and use it, then it never gets the resources that it needs to be fully developed. And if it's never fully developed, then Black people are going to use that as an excuse to stay over on the plantation, right? And again, continue to build up YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and all these other platforms instead of working diligently to build up our own independent institutions. So I want to shout out my brother Okunini Obadele Kambone for the work that he's doing with the Abibi Tumi platform. Hopefully you all are subscribed. The last lesson, that's a very important lesson that Garvey honed in on, was that an element of religion or ritual is necessary to pull together any organized formation of Black people. Right, it's impossible to organize Black people around some atheistic, non-spiritual, like or secular based ideology or philosophy. Black people require spiritual engagement. It's literally no way around it. And you see that, I mean, the largest developments of Black people or movements of Black people in the 20th century were movements that at their core spiritual movements, right? So the UNIA, the Nation of Islam, these were movements that at their core were spiritual movements, right? So it's impossible to get away from that. Okay, so what I'd like to do really quick here, just in my last few minutes before I open up for Q&A, because I talked about the fact that, you know, you can't say that you are a Pan-Africanist if you are not actively engaged in an organization. Like, show me your organizational work. You understand what I'm saying? Like, and if the organization, if you're not a part of an organization, then start one, build one, or find one that shares your values and your interests and join it. So what I like to do really quick is just speak about the organization that I do all of my work with and that I've been with for about the last 3 years. And that organization is Afrocentricity International. So it's an organization that was founded in 2011 by Dr. Molefi Kete Asante and Dr. Omowale. I don't want to say strangely enough, but I guess in reading Garvey's lesson on the purpose of institutions, what I take a great deal of, I guess, pride in and being a member of Afrocentricity is the call for us to develop our own ideas, for us to sharpen those ideas and build institutions based upon those ideas, as one that Dr. Mazama and Dr. Molefi Kete Asante took up when they created Afrocentricity International, right? They were very clear that they were creating something that comes out of that heritage or out of that tradition of Garvey, but they said that they have to take it further, right? They need that fully developed idea that has to be the thing that animates, right? Well, the spirit animates, but in terms of the consciousness, right? The thing that unlocks your consciousness has to be clear. It has to be precise. So the development of a theory, meaning Afrocentricity, which was I would say really the work of a significant amount of scholars coming out of the Chicago school, like, Baba Jacob Carruthers, but also, Dr. Molefi Asante, the crystallization of that idea into what's referred to as Afrocentricity, which became a theory, which became the thing that we now use to animate and develop our institutional life, is something that is at the core of Afrocentricity International, the organization that was founded in 2011, and is now really growing rapidly all over the African continent and slowly making its way to North America. So we look forward to seeing some growth here as well. But I'll just read about the organization really quick just to give you a quick perspective. So it says here that in the spirit of Marcus Garvey, Afrocentricity International is a global African organization devoted to building consciousness for the uniting of the African continent and the international rise of a victorious consciousness in the Pan-African community. Based on the theory of Afrocentricity, the organization seeks to advance information and interpretation about the African world in the United States, the Caribbean, South America, Europe, and Africa. Afrocentricity International is committed to the creation of a radical African consciousness that demands freedom, justice, and reciprocity throughout the world. To this end, we are dedicated to the African Renaissance, right? That African rebirth, to be reborn. That's what Renaissance means. The unstoppable growth of African communities and the revolutionary cultural and spiritual uplift of people who have been dislocated by nearly 500 years of domination by Europeans and Arabs in Africa and throughout the world. Thus, Afrocentricity International is an organized movement for transformation at a local, regional, national, and international level. Already, Afrocentricity International has attracted adherents and votaries from Africa, Europe, South America, and North America who have given their support to an organization based on the best of African values, right? So I think that's very important because this is the work that Garvey called us to do, right? He said that we need to be stalwarts in the cultivation of our culture and the cultivation of our ideas, right? And when I look around and I look at the work we're doing internally at Afrocentricity International and the communities that we're doing it in at a local, national, and international level, I'm proud to say that we are doing that work and carrying that tradition forward that Garvey started with the UNIA. So just really quick, I'll give you a quick definition of Afrocentricity. So Afrocentricity is a mode. It's a way of thought and action in which the centrality of African interests, values, and perspectives predominate, right? That VIP, values, interests, and perspective. Afrocentric philosophy, as expounded by Molefi Kete Asante and Amma Mazama, the central figures of the Temple School, is a way of answering all cultural, economic, political, and social questions related to African people from a centered perspective, right? So you're African centered, you're centered on self, you're not dislocated or outside of yourself looking in at self and basically confused because you've been turned, inside out, or kind of like double consciousness is what Du Bois referred to it as. But I think that it's very important that we be centered when we talk about ourself, and when we talk about when we approach solving problems, that we're solving them from a centered perspective. Statement of purpose of the organization. So it says here that not since Marcus Garvey's UNIA has an international Pan-African organization existed to coordinate the collective efforts of African people worldwide. Consequently, we've had no united voice, no global networking, and no widespread sharing of resources and ideas. Afrocentricity International seeks to serve as a conduit by which the global African community is reconnected and moved towards collective action in service of African liberation. Right, so that's point one on our statement of purpose. Point two, it says, not since Marcus Garvey's UNIA has an international Pan-African organization existed that is committed to reforming the moral character of African people. Consequently, our mental and spiritual conditioning continues to reflect the psychological bondage of racial inferiority, right? Domination has corrupted our character. You talk about that, Iwa Pele, right? That good character, right? We as African people have to be about doing that work of reforming our character, right? Of building our character and building our consciousness. But I always argue that it's character before consciousness, because you can have all the knowledge in the world and have poor character and it's meaningless, right? So I think that that's very important. And then, last but not least, it states that not since Marcus Garvey's UNIA has an international Pan-African organization existed to articulate our collective aspiration for self-determination, self-reliance, and self-governance. So more about AI or Afrocentricity International. It's a vehicle, right? Garvey talked about the UNIA being a vehicle. Well, AI is a vehicle that was created to serve as a vessel by which the global African spirit can be reborn, revitalized, reconstructed, and restored. Our member chapters comprise an international network of grassroots organizers that have committed themselves to speaking in one voice in the interests of Africa. Our mission is very simple. It's to accelerate the rise of Afrocentric consciousness, the hallmark of a true African Renaissance. So the way that we do that is we engage our members spiritually, historically, and intellectually to produce an individual that acts in the best interests of our race, politically, socially, and economically. Our method, Afrocentricity International supports the economic, cultural, and educational elevation of African people in an effort to create cultural consciousness. Our method is Afrocentric and Pan-African, participating at the national and international levels in the creation of an advanced cadre of individuals whose aim is to bring into existence an African Renaissance, right? So we're always just talking about that rebirth, that awakening, that mass awakening of African people. And AI seeks to be a vanguard organization at the forefront that is leading the charge in awakening our people and building their character and organizing them for action, right? Because the action, Baba Hannibal Afrique used to say, theory means nothing, show me your work, right? Assata Shakur would say that, theory without action is meaningless, or theory without practice is meaningless, right? So you can develop all this fancy theory, but if that theory hasn't been put to work and isn't represented by action, then it's meaningless. That's why we talk about the need, and we show through our efforts, through our work, through the sweat of our brow, the importance of action, right? So as an organization, we're organized for a purpose and we're moving in a particular direction. Our organization operates across 4 dimensions of service, that being spiritual, political, economic, and intellectual. The spiritual, right, really the spiritual is the animating force of everything that we do. It's the foundation. It is the bed rock, right? Baba J. Carruthers plainly states that the return of African civilization will never occur, right? The rebirth of African civilization will never occur without a return to African spirituality, right? So spirituality is really a core component of everything that we do throughout the organization. And then just our activities at the divisional level. Of course, we have classes, lectures, workshops. We do trips, social gatherings, initiations. I mean, we do weddings, funerals, namings, birthing ceremonies, you name it, we do it. African art, foods, festivals, fashion, commerce, right? It's all there, right? These are all attributes of our culture, right? So being, culturally centered, it's very important that we have these offerings for our community so that we can engage you on a variety of different levels. These are just some images just over the past couple of years. So you see there in the center, top left, is Dr. Amamazama, our co-founder and leader of Afrocentricity International. I believe we were having a ceremony that day for our brother Ife, Sister Ife's husband, Brother Ibo Chenga, who had transitioned. So we were having a ceremony for him at the shrine on that day. But just the images you see, the image that you see, the bottom right-hand side, was we were having a commemoration for Garvey. I think this was Garvey's birthday, 2018. We were commemorating and celebrating Garvey that day. Bottom left, that was the brother Shanudi Hanbo, who's the leader of the division in Benin. So what AI does is we have an international convention annually, and the way that we structure it is we do 2 on the continent and then 2 in the diaspora, right? So in 2017, the convention was in Haiti. In 2018, it was in Benin. In 2019, it was in the Ivory Coast. 2020, it was meant to be in Brazil, but with this whole COVID situation, it kind of like prevented it from occurring. But I'm looking forward to our next convention as an organization. These are just more images of the chapter events that we've done when we're out in the community engaging. What you see there on the bottom right-hand side is that was last year when we went up to Ferncliff Cemetery for the Malcolm X Day pilgrimage. So of course, bring the kids, bring the family with us, bring members of our chapter every year. I think last year we took 1 full bus, but the number is always growing of people in the chapter who want to go up to Ferncliff Cemetery with us to pay homage to Nana Malcolm X. So how you can get involved, reach out. We're definitely on social media. We're on all socials, including Abibi Toomey. We meet in person. Well, right now our meetings are done virtually every first and third Sunday of the month at 3 p.m. But take the pledge, right? So we as Afrocentrists, in the spirit of Ma'at, seek peace, harmony, and justice, order, balance, and truth. As members of the AI network, we are committed to restoring the whole of the African world to a place of sacredness and global prestige. We pledge ourselves to do all in our power to bolster a movement towards a rise of Afrocentric consciousness, which is the hallmark of the necessary unity that will bring about the global African Renaissance. So I thank you all again for your time. Again, I want to thank my brother Bomani. I want to thank my brother Alias for putting on this fantastic event with the 100 years in the Whirlwind Conference. So at this point, if y'all have any questions, I'm available for Q&A. All right, peace.
All right, peace, brothers. Hassan, I'm here for the Q&A.
Okay, if anybody has any questions, you can take yourself off mute and fire away. In the chat, there was a few questions in the chat. that said, Sister Afia asks, how would you define Pan-Africanism?
So Sister Afia, so first and foremost, to everyone who was asking for the images from the slides, I apologize. So that was a pre-recording I did the other night before I left for vacation. But if you put your emails in the chat, or I can give the slides to Brother Hassan, and we can share them with everybody so they can make sure that they have access to the slides and all the images and information. But in terms of defining Pan-Africanism, I would argue that Pan-Africanism is better defined by the projects that are associated with it. So in that regard, what I did recently is I put together a presentation or a lecture that was breaking down the different projects that have been done under the banner of Pan-Africanism, right? Because if you break apart Pan-Africanism, all it means is, like, pan is a term that means all, right? So it's an activity that all African people engage in, but typically with a purpose, right? So that purpose is really what defines it. And what I'm arguing is that there have been 5 different purposes that have been carried out historically under Pan-Africanism, and those projects have been colonial, and meaning that's the white people that have looked to basically colonize all African people on the African continent, and they literally referred to that project as Pan-Africanism, right? If you look back at the historical documents that I show in that lecture, you'll see that, you know, they called their project Pan-Africanism. It's been a neo-colonial project. It's been a socialist project. It's been a capitalist project, and that's one that Dr. John Henry Clark, or Nana John Henry Clark, called out quite often. And I also referenced that in the lecture. And then last but not least, it's been a nationalist project, right? So as a Garveyite, that's the project, when I'm talking about Pan-Africanism, that's the one that I'm referring to. Because Garvey said that our aim and our objective is the development of a nation, of a superstate on the African continent that would be strong enough to protect the interests of African people everywhere, right? So that nation building project is what I'm referring to when I'm talking about Pan-Africanism. But I think that it's important that people understand that when you hear the word Pan-Africanism, it means nothing without the next term that's associated with it, right? Because people oftentimes, like, they'll confuse, like, Nkrumah's project with Garvey's project, right? One of the things that Nkrumah was looking to do was to create a socialist society, you know, on the African continent, and he referred to that project as Pan-Africanism. Well, that wasn't the same project as Garvey's project. So if you don't understand those differences, you can easily be confused. Let me look at the chat here, see if there are more questions. Okay. So yeah, Sister Afia, I have your email. I'll forward you the slides. Nice. Let me copy and paste your email. All right.
Thank you, Baba. I just want to say this was such a powerful discussion, and it caused me to really do a lot of self-reflection, because I love Garvey. I got pictures of him, I got his flag, but I never really studied him. And I'm sitting here saying to myself, why? Why haven't I did a real in-depth study of a man who was able to really gather the biggest movement, I believe, in history of African people? And I just want to thank you for the presentation. It was just very powerful, it was very moving, and you gave me a lot to think about and to do. So I appreciate you for the work, the time, and the effort you put in carrying his light and his energy, so we can be about the serious work of really doing what we say we want to do with ourselves, for ourselves and for our people. So powerful, powerful presentation. I don't know, you said it was recorded. I don't know if the recording is available, because I definitely need to watch it again and sit down and share it with my family and my son. Even if I have to pay for it, I will. I want to support you. So
yeah, you don't have to pay at all. This is Sister Afia I'm speaking to, correct?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. As soon as I get off, as soon as we hang up here, I'll forward you the presentation with the slides. And it's my apologies again, because I was headed out with my family for vacation. So I did this the night before I left, and I didn't realize until after I recorded it that the slides weren't showing for the entire presentation. So that was my bad. But yeah, Garvey is significant, you know, and one of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to, like, you know, the Black nationalist movement, and people who call themselves Garveyites is A, you know, we don't read Garvey, and B, we don't do the necessary work of truly becoming politically educated. And as a result, we end up, you know, putting forth strategies that are not effective, right? Because we aren't doing that necessary study. So I try to encourage people to really, you know, to read Garvey, you know, start with the philosophies and opinions of Marcus Garvey, because, you know, my argument is that Garvey has put forward the most comprehensive solution for Black people in the 20th century, and that solution that he put forth is still applicable in the 21st century. But if you don't read it, you won't know what the solution is. So the work that you may be doing work that goes against Garvey. So I think that it's just important that we all get that clarity, right? Because it starts with clarity, being clear on what the work is, being clear on who our enemies are, and being clear on who we are as a people, you know. And if you start from there, you're in a good position to do the work.
Yes, thank you again. Very powerful.
You know, thank you. I appreciate you just attending and listening, and I hope you are just finding all the activities at the conference this weekend, you know, to be very helpful and edifying, because we need more things like this to occur, you know, so we can come together, we can learn and grow together.
No, you're right. I'm glad I am finding this conference very energizing and very motivational, and it keeps me back on focus and motivated. So I'm grateful for you in this conference.
Doc Shotgun. Yeah. Intro to O. And my dude, that Timbuktu to Ave. Renew your passion, shun the condition, and not the who, what, when, where, and you are from. At last. Put the higher